Hello, folks. Welcome to another DNA Company webinar. My name is Justin Harris. I'm a certified functional genomics practitioner for the DNA Company. And, when it comes to creating the ideal epigenetic environment, I think metabolism is obviously one of the most important things to consider. And we look at metabolism from a few different angles, right? Everything from gut health to insulin response to macronutrient and micronutrient synthesis, inflammation, detox, and even some genetic sensitivities. But now we're expanding that viewpoint even further by adding some new genes. And I think that it can really help to paint a more detailed metabolic picture. So tonight we're going to go over a couple of these additions from the lens of metabolism and weight management. And this is going to help to really get people the ideal epigenetic inputs when it comes to that diet and figure out what's optimal. So here to discuss it with me, of course, is the great and powerful Chief Science Officer of the DNA Company, Dr. Krista Kosterman.
Oh, sure. It's good to see you this evening, Justin. And audience, it's good while I can't see you. It is very good to be here with you this evening. It's a nice change of pace. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm ready to dive in. It's so exciting that we're adding new genes in. We've been talking about the
Mhm.
same kind of gamut for a little bit. We've always had a really solid subset of genes that we look at, but the ones that we're adding were very well thought out, particularly by yourself, Dr. K, and they're just giving us a better picture of what we can do and how we can help people. And that's, of course, what we're here to do.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So why don't we dig into it with no further ado?
Absolutely. And if you guys haven't had a chance to fill out the poll, then please do so that we can get to it. We love knowing why you guys are here. I think that we'll also kind of preface this a little bit with some of the genes that we already look at, just so we can kind of paint the picture. And then we'll explain how these new genes that we're integrating will actually work into this whole picture. So perhaps I'll get Vanny now then to just pull up the poll so that we can dive on in. Vanny, if you wouldn't mind doing that. Lovely. Okay. So we asked you guys a handful of questions here just to kind of get an idea of why you're here and how we can serve you. So the first one is very simple. What's the main reason why you're joining this webinar? And a pretty even split. You guys are here to understand your metabolism better, and a lot of you are here to learn why weight loss is so difficult for you. We've found that it's a really individual thing, and some people respond better to different diets than others. And I think that your genes play a pretty sizable role in all of that. So we are going to be checking that out. And you guys are also here to learn about the new genes. 35% of you are just excited to see what the additions are. So welcome. And just a few of you, 7%, are just generally curious about what we're going to be talking about. So welcome to y'all as well. The second question that we asked is, so when it comes to weight loss, what is the biggest challenge that you guys are facing? And it's a pretty even split. In fact, about half of you aren't quite sure, right? And that's the thing. It is a puzzle, and it's something where there's a lot of different moving parts to it, like I said in the intro. But you guys, a lot of you, there's sugar cravings, there's slow metabolism involved, fatigue and low energy. So we can talk a little bit about that. Hormones, there's absolutely a hormonal component to this. And we'll dive into a little bit of all these categories tonight. The third question is, do you feel that certain foods affect you more than they affect other people? And yeah, like half of you are saying carbohydrates affect you more than other people. And carbohydrates are definitely a topic of the evening because one of the genes that we talk about is very relevant for that. So we're going to be talking about the various genes associated with carbohydrate metabolism. Smaller percentage, like 6%, say fats. Just 2% say caffeine, but a lot of you would say sugar and alcohol is implicit in this. And about 29% are saying not so sure. So we'll help you guys to navigate this and incorporate the DNA 360 into your dietary options. The fourth question is, have you ever felt your weight just doesn't respond the same way that others do on the same diet? And a lot of you, like half of you, are saying yes all the time. And we see it. Different diets are meant for different people. There really is no one size fits all when it comes to this dietary equation. A very small percentage of you actually said never. So only 7% say that it's just whatever you eat seems to work for you. And 12% said rarely, and 36% said sometimes. So, I think that the variability explains itself there. A lot of us respond differently to different diets. The very last question is, what do you feel impacts your metabolism most? And we gave you a few options, being sleep, stress, hormones, gut health, and vitamins and minerals. And relatively even split, but a lot of you are saying stress and gut health seem to be the biggest movers there. The thing is, sleep, hormones, all of these things are impacted by stress and by gut status as well. So I think that all of those are kind of all encompassing. But it looks like we got a pretty good idea of who's here and why, Dr. K.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to chatting through, especially I think we have three genes in particular that will be really influential to this conversation. Before we do dive in, first of all, as a mic check, I got some feedback I wasn't loud enough. Has this been helpful? Can
I
you
can hear
toss
you
it?
okay.
Yeah, toss it into the chat, guys. I think it was, let's see. Perfect. Okay. Now, uh, before we get into it, there's been a few people asking the question of do they get the new genes? So everyone here this evening that has had their DNA 360 done 2023 and onwards, so between 2023 and now, they do have access to these new genes. That said, they're only released right now through our app. So you're not going to get them through your portal or the web page experience. You do need to go into the app. So I would encourage that you download the app, and we have put that link into the chat, and you will see the genes in there that we are talking about. And we'll make sure of those 6 new genes, okay, that we're talking about this evening, we'll point to the reports as to where they are contained. Okay.
Absolutely. And it's probably worthwhile for me to give just a brief overview of kind of some of the genes that we're already looking at. And that way it can preface the conversation for the couple new ones that we're going to be discussing as additions. So there's a few that we really rely on as far as things like insulin response and your overall response to things like carbohydrates, fatty acids, etc. I'll tell you, as a practitioner, I mean, the first thing I typically look at is actually gut health status. I like to know a little bit about how your gut is working because that is exactly where your nutrients are going to be taken in, right? So the first gene I typically look at in these dietary conversations with people is GSTM1. That would be the detox at the level of the gut. If you have 0 copies or 2 copies, it can represent some issues with your overall gut status. And if you have gut issues, I'm telling you, it plays a really big role in how you actually metabolize nutrients. So
Mhm.
GSTM1, that's in your detoxification section. That's very important. The next gene that I personally go to is TCF7L2, and that's a strong determinant of your insulin response. If you have suboptimal TCF7L2, it basically means that you can have a 1.5 greater times insulin response when you take in like a really energy dense meal, right? And that can be coming from carbohydrates or it can be coming from fatty acids, especially depending on what the rest of this profile looks like. But TCF7L2, very important. From there, I move into the macronutrients. So we look at APOA2. That one is for lipid metabolism. And this is relevant for people that are on the higher fat diets, especially saturated fat. If you don't metabolize that well genetically at a baseline, you're going to have a little bit of trouble with weight management and metabolic health. The starch one is called AMY1, AMI1, and that is basically a salivary amylase gene. And suboptimal gene there with suboptimal TCF7L2, that makes it a heck of a lot harder for you to maintain blood sugar regulation and things when you have especially a higher starch-based carbohydrate diet. So those really matter. When we move on to the micronutrients, there's one called SLC23A1. That's for vitamin C transport. There's another one in the SLC family called SLC30A8, and that is very important for zinc transport as well as things like fasting glucose, and it actually does impact your insulin response as well. Then we have BCMO1. This is all in your dietary report, by the way. BCMO1 is relevant for how your body takes inactive vitamin A, being beta carotene, and it converts it into the active form, being retinol. if you're suboptimal here, you're not going to be able to rely on carrots and sweet peppers and these kinds of things to get your active vitamin A. It's just not converting properly in there. So that's a very important gene to know because vitamin A is for eyesight, skin health, immune health, etc.
Mhm.
Then we look at some intolerances as well. So things like MCM6, that would be for lactose tolerance, and that's very important for things like gut inflammation, etc. If you're suboptimal there, you may want to go for the lactose-free versions of things. We also look at a family of genes called HLA, that's human leukocyte antigen genes. And really, if you have either celiac disease or non celiac but gluten sensitive, those genes will absolutely show you that. And we all know that gluten can be a nightmare. Dr. K and myself are both gluten free, and
Mhm.
it's tough. It's a tough one to overcome, but we do it.
Yeah.
What have I missed? CYP1A2 is for caffeine metabolism, by the way. So we look at that as far as a phase one detoxification enzyme. And it's also of relevance for how your body processes stimulants like caffeine, ephedrine, etc. If you're a fast metabolizer there, it means that you're likely someone who's not going to have sleep disruptions and things like that from caffeine intake. So that's another really important one there. Uh, did I miss anything, Dr. K?
No, I think that was a very quick but very extensive summary of some of the genes that we look at that influence weight. And so for people who want a replay of that, don't hesitate. We don't send out notes, but we do give access to the webinar replays. So you are able to go back and hear Justin's retelling of it. And those, I think, Justin, that you mentioned are all very directly or indirectly impacting of metabolism. I'd really encourage the audience in particular as we jump into the new year and as we jump into different perspectives of how do we support our weight. You can also look at, we've done several webinars that examine genes that influence appetite and satiety. And so Justin, I would offer those are the only ones you really didn't cover there, but they have been covered in other webinars. And so we'll put a few links into the chat so that you can see those as well. But the point of tonight, guys, is to be focusing in a very deep, intimate fashion with some of our new genes. And so I wonder, Justin, you ready for that?
Yes, I'm ready for that. And I'm seeing in the chat, yeah, that I went through that pretty quickly. That was meant to be brevity because we've done so many webinars about that. But we do have
Mhm.
Q&A, by the way, at the end of this session. So if you do want any
Mhm.
clarification on the genes that I just briefly ran down, by all means, I'm happy to elaborate.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm ready to dive into some of the new genes if you are, Dr. K.
Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so there's definitely some relevance here for metabolic rate with the different genes that we're going to be talking about. One of the ones that we're going to be bringing up is called UCP1, and that's a pretty fascinating gene. It has a lot to do with like thermoregulation of the body and how that goes. So
Mhm.
UCP1 is pretty interesting. It's actually an uncoupling protein and it's a mitochondrial protein and is found mainly in the brown and the beige fat, right? That adipose tissue. It generates heat instead of ATP by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation, and it's activated by cold exposure as well as sympathetic nervous system signaling. So it actually increases energy expenditure as well as fatty acid oxidation. So
Mhm.
when it's optimal, it's linked to improved metabolic health, and it's really a target for a lot of obesity research because of that. It helps to maintain your body temperature in cold environments, so it increases
Mhm.
that energy expenditure. And I'll tell you, higher UCP activity is also associated with increased fat oxidation, lower fat mass, as well as improved insulin sensitivity. So this is a pretty important gene to be checking out.
Yeah, really what we're saying, and I never want to kind of couch genes that have to do with metabolism in good or bad light. Really, we have to think about how have we evolved. So once upon a time, we didn't necessarily have access to the food that we did. So we wanted to be much more conserving of our energy. And so people who have low thermogenic profile activities. And so these are people with A as in Andrew, so Andrew presentations. they tend to be people that are very conserving, very territorial. They like to hold on to their energy stores. So they're not allowing any of that to leak out in terms of heat through that brown fat, right? So, I guess unfortunately, in today's environments where we have access to lots of food and we don't necessarily, our bodies don't need to be as conservative with storing that energy, we've kind of flipped this gene on its head in that this may be a little bit of a less advantageous presentation because you're someone that's really holding on to that stored energy. And when you get to a point of like, okay, it's the new year, I want to lose some weight. Unfortunately, people with this low thermogenic presentation, this AA presentation for UCP1, which you are going to be finding in your diet and nutrition summary section. So go into the app, go into diet and nutrition, go into the system summary. Okay. Once you're there, you'll see that presentation. And unfortunately, those with that AA, they're going to be more weight loss resistant. They're going to have to, unfortunately, put a bit more energy and effort into it because this is one of the genes, one of the many genes that say, hey, we want to hold on to this because we have a memory embedded in our genes of when we didn't always have access to food, when we didn't have access to this surplus. So we're going to hold on to it really tight. Okay. If you have the opposite presentation, that's the GG presentation, Gregory, Gregory. Okay. That means you have higher thermogenic activity, meaning your body isn't as conservative. It isn't holding on to this energy store in the same way. And so it will be releasing some of that energy, in particular as heat, right, within that brown fat. And so, while I will never pretend that weight loss per se is an easy journey, but at least in terms of this gene, because it's much more willing to let things go, right? That does mean that you're going to have a bit of an easier time losing weight. Again, based on this gene, there's so many different variables, and I don't want to paint the story as if it's simple.
Yeah, for sure. And if it is suboptimal, then this is an area that we're going to really want to target with the strategies as well, right? So, for example, like temperature manipulation, like really using sauna as a strategy, I mean, that can be valuable as well there.
Mhm.
There's even ingredients like, for example, conjugated linoleic acid, being CLA. It's actually an omega-6 derivative. And of course, I don't recommend eating lots of omega-6s, but this particular derivative can actually help to target brown fat adipose as well, and it can help to improve that whole situation. Thermogenic ingredients can be valuable there as well. You know, things like your cayenne pepper extract, your black pepper extract. These things can help aid in thermogenesis. And people that do have suboptimal UCP1 tend to run a little bit cold as well in general, right? So just weight training, all these things can really be beneficial there. But I've found that adding in sauna strategy and things for people that are suboptimal here can really be a valuable thing to do. I'm also a fan of L-carnitine as a substrate here because it helps to take those fat deposits and push them into the mitochondria so that they can be burned that little bit more efficiently, right? So there's a couple of great ingredients that you can add in to help improve this. And then just the normal weight loss stuff tends to amplify, right? If you do like an intermittent fasting strategy or something like that, it'll work a little bit better with a couple of these extra strategies as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. What's another new gene that really influences or diversifies, adds spice to this conversation?
Yeah, so we're also talking about one called MLX-IPL, and that's a really important one for triglyceride conversion. So
Mhm.
I should probably just explain what that really looks like, and then maybe you can dive into how the gene
Mhm.
influences this. So carbohydrates become triglycerides, right? So dietary carbohydrates, they're broken down into glucose, which then enters the bloodstream. And they're used for energy first, right? So the cells use glucose for immediate energy, or they store it as glycogen in the liver, in the muscle. Glycogen is glucose. It's just kind of the storage form of that. The body can really only store like a few hundred grams of glycogen before it starts to sort of spill over, so to speak. So if you've filled your glycogen storages and then you keep on eating carbohydrates, fructose and starches and what have you, Then there's
Mhm.
excess conversion. So when glycogen storages are full and glucose intake remains high, especially from those refined carbs, then the liver will start to convert excess glucose into fatty acids, right? And that is triglyceride formation. So these fatty acids are combined with glycerol and they basically form triglycerides, which are packaged into the VLDL particles and sent into the adipose tissue for storage. So there can be a lot of health implications when triglycerides are raised, right? High intake of refined carbs and sugars, notably fructose, raise the triglycerides, and then that can contribute to things like insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular risk, fatty liver, weight gain, these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I'll let you explain what the gene actually does and relevance for that. But that's the whole pathway with triglycerides.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you for that explanation. So, what we're looking at when we're looking at MLX-IPL is the cueing that your body has, how aggressive, how quick your body is going to be converting and creating your carbohydrate into these triglycerides. And so, the gene that we look at, if you have a C allele, C as in Charlie, you have an inability innately based on this gene to properly regulate how you're doing that. Kind of think about it. You're going full force ahead. You're producing a lot of those triglycerides. And remember that, as Justin said, once we create that triglyceride, that fatty form of all these sugars, the storage form of these sugars, it then needs to be deposited somewhere. That VLDL is going to take it and it's either going to ship it off to adipose tissue, to visceral fat. So think of fat that encloses your organs, or in some situations, especially if there's not enough VLDL to be shipping it off to all these places, it's going to be hanging out in the liver. And this is where you start to see some problems of some non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The liver is creating so much of this fat, so much of this triglyceride, it has nowhere else to go because we filled up all those little ships that are supposed to be taking it elsewhere. So instead, unfortunately, it gets deposited in the liver. Okay. And so this will increase risk for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? And this is something that unfortunately is a consequence of poor diet and obesity. Okay, in that when you're consuming, in particular, those large amounts of carbohydrate, are you predisposed to be creating a lot of this triglyceride? And if so, especially if there's that first initial bump that your body's so happy to be making it, it needs to be deposited somewhere, and sometimes that's the liver. So people with the C allele, Charlie Charlie in particular, so CC, they tend to be the ones that make a lot and therefore have greater risk for this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. All right. So something to be mindful of because statistically speaking, right now, amongst Americans, about 25 to 30% of Americans sit in the early stages of this fatty liver disease. And the good of this early stages is very reversible, right? The liver is wonderfully resilient and it can fix itself. It's one of the few organs in the body that can recreate and heal, but that's only if you're catching it at early stages. So if you have this gene, if you're seeing those C alleles, be mindful that when you consume a lot of carbohydrate, especially fructose, as well as alcohol, you're really pushing your liver to make those triglycerides. And if they have nowhere else to go, they're going to hang out in the liver and cause a little bit of ruckus and trouble, right? And so, Justin, just before I pass it back to you, audience, if you are looking for this gene, you can find it in our cardiovascular report. It will be tucked into, I believe the report is hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol. I forget the exact naming of the report, but the one that talks about blood lipids, blood cholesterols, you'll find this gene in there. Okay.
Yeah, and it's important to know that this is something that we can do a lot about, right? From a
Mhm.
coaching perspective. I mean, let's say that, heaven forbid, you have suboptimal TCF7L2 and suboptimal AMY1, And now you also have this issue with the MLX. These are the people that are going to be candidates for, like, let's say, a Mediterranean diet or something that's going to be a little bit more cleansing to the liver, as well as a lower starch version of it. If you want to eat starches, I mean, there's strategies like resistant starch. Like, I'm a really big fan of that for people who just don't digest them that well. If you take a rice or a potato and you cook it and you cool it, it changes the carbohydrate structure. So it's way lower glycemic, but then it's also a prebiotic fiber, right? So it kind of lines the intestine instead of going right into the bloodstream, and it's going to be a lot less metabolically consequential there. Carb cycling can be fantastic for these people, right? And doing a little bit higher fat and protein forward with some good fibers, and then just upping the ante with the starches now and then, once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on where you're at metabolically. All of these strategies can be very valuable. I think that fasting elements as well can be really useful for helping to fix this. And then it's a matter of liver support, right? Using proper hydration strategies, ingredients like TUDCA, silymarin, which is like a milk thistle extract, N-acetylcysteine, etc. If you support the liver and you support the gut and you give your body the correct macronutrients, and then you do a couple of things specifically for blood sugar regulation, you can really cut down on some of the consequences of having suboptimal genes here. So try to remember that none of these are ever intended as doom and gloom conversations. There's always something. There's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think I really like this gene in the sense, as you point out, it's an empowering gene. Even if you do have that poor presentation, understanding your poor presentation means, cool, I know what my liver does in response to a lot of sugar, a lot of fructose. So think high concentrated. I mean, I won't really say fruit per se. We're really more talking when we have corn extracts that go into things like pop and other sweet goodies, as well as alcohol. We can't really avoid that conversation, especially around the holidays. Double whammy if you're doing both in one go. Um, but we know that those are big triggers for this poor presentation. So the conversation has to be, sure, maybe sometimes I'm going to have those treats, but those treats don't get to be every day for me if I want to support liver health, which is so foundational to every ounce of health, given it is that one of our major filtration systems within the body.
Yeah, a major filtration system, as well as the thing that produces the bile in the first place that you need to digest certain things like fatty acids. Liver
Mhm.
congestion is huge, and it's really common actually, and especially if you have suboptimal GST-T1, meaning you have one or zero copies of that. You can test this, right? Like, you can look at liver enzymes, you can look at things like urinary bile acids and understand where your liver function is. I include liver conversations with metabolism conversations, because that whole thing, it's called enterohepatic circulation, and it's this relationship between the liver and the gallbladder and the gut, and it's meant to be on a really efficient little cycle there. So it's part of your detox and it's part of your digestion, and I'm telling you, you can have disruptions there and it can really make it so that you don't digest nutrients as well. So be aware of that one.
Yeah. Before we move on to our next gene, audience, I'm seeing a lot of questions of, oh, I can't find my gene. Just a reminder that every time Justin and I reference where this new gene is located, right now it's exclusively located within the app. So you do need to download the app and access your DNA 360 through the app in order to see these new genes, okay? They're not currently available in the portal. Right. So I hope that's helpful because I'm seeing that question a few times. Okay. All right.
All right. So I suppose we can move on to the next aspect of this that we're going to talk about. And, right in the beginning, I was talking about inflammation as well, and just saying that that is also a part of this. If you have chronic inflammation and that inflammatory response turned on in the body, understand that your metabolic inclination is going to be to store more weight, right? Inflammation and cortisol and these things really matter as far as your metabolism. And you can be storing up to a third of your body weight. It's not even fat, it's just like tissue inflammation and water storage and these kinds of things. So, one of the new genes that we're also talking about is actually a new part of the vitamin D pathway. We've always killed it with this vitamin D pathway because it really gives you a nice zoomed out picture of what it looks like. And I'll briefly go over what we were already looking at, and then we can talk about the incorporation of the new gene because it's very important as well. So I'll go through this slightly slower just so that everybody doesn't think I'm rushing through too much tonight. So there's three different steps that we look at as far as vitamin D synthesis in the body. And remember, vitamin D is actually a hormone more so than it is a micronutrient. This is not something that we get very much via a digestive pathway. It's more of a hormetic pathway. So what happens is when you get sunshine on your skin, right, cholesterol is converted into vitamin D. There's a precursor, which is D2, and D2 is inactive. D2 has to be converted into D3 in order for D3 to actually exert its influence on the cells and do its job. So vitamin D2 is completely inactive, and there is actually an enzyme which is encoded by a gene called CYP2R1. CYP2R1 is what does that converting of D2 into D3. So if you're suboptimal there, even when you're getting sunshine on your skin and you're tanning, there's just really limited conversion to that active D3 that's going to take place. Once it is activated, though, a second gene takes over, which is like the Uber that takes the now active vitamin D to the receptor site. And that's called GCVDBP. That is vitamin D binding protein. So if you're suboptimal there, there's a lot of clinical relevance for how you would dose a vitamin D supplement. A vitamin D supplement is already in its D3 format. You're not going to find a lot of them that are D2 because why take the precursor in the first place when we can just load you up with the real vitamin hormone? So the D3 will be delivered by this VDBP to the receptor site. And believe it or not, the receptor site is also genetically encoded. So that is simply called VDR, vitamin D receptor. Interestingly, here, there's also a gene in your cardiovascular panel called NOS3 that I include in this conversation with people because it has to do with nitric oxide production in the body. And nitric oxide actually releases internally stored vitamin D so that your body can uptake it and use it, get it into the receptor site. So also consider that if you're suboptimal for NOS3, you may want to add some nitric oxide precursors or get some red light therapy or something that really boosts up nitric oxide because that will also help you to release that vitamin D. Then we get into the new gene. I don't know if you want to go ahead and tackle that one, Dr. K.
Yeah, absolutely. So audience, remember that vitamin D isn't this one static thing. Instead, there's going to be multiple lives, and Justin's talked about a few of those, right? This conversion of D2 into D3. This gene looks at another decision point, if you will, along the vitamin D synthesis pathway. So vitamin D can act to a degree as a hormone, and so many of our hormones have the backbone of cholesterol. And so along this pathway to becoming vitamin D, there's a decision point within the body that our new gene influences that really says, is this going to become cholesterol or is this going to become vitamin D? And this gene influences the preference your body has towards those different pathways. Now, remember, this is not an either or, right? This gene isn't going to say you only make cholesterol, you only make vitamin D. It's really speaking to a preference between the two. And so if you have a GG or a Gregory presentation, you are more likely to be pushing towards that cholesterol synthesis pathway, as opposed to if you have a Tom presentation, where you're a bit more happy to go towards that vitamin D pathway. And this is there's such impact of this gene that all things equal in other people, when we look at blood levels, this can account for about a 5-point difference between these two genotypes in blood work. So this is something that really does shift you one way or the other. And when we're talking about weight loss, I want to make sure that we're very mindful of the impact of vitamin D, both in terms of those who carry a little bit of extra weight, as well as the energy that goes towards losing weight. And someone's asking what the new gene was, and I apologize. I'm not actually sure I introduced it. So thank you for those questions. The gene that I've been talking about with no name is called DHCR7, and you are going to find that in your vitamin D report. The vitamin D report is going to be found within your inflammation section. Okay, so go to inflammation, scroll through, you'll find vitamin D, and then you can click on the results there. Okay. So if I backtrack to where I was before that, yes, okay. Um, uh, Vitamin D is important when we consider weight loss or those that want to lose weight for two different reasons. The first reason, let's talk about if you're in a state of having excess weight. Vitamin D is a fat soluble piece or particle within the body, meaning the body is very happy to store it in fat. And so people who are carrying extra weight, all other things equal, are actually going to have a lower serum vitamin D because more of that is being sequestered into. So hear this, if you're on this webinar, we're thinking through metabolism, we're thinking possibly through weight loss. You may have a lower vitamin D simply because of some of the extra weight you're carrying. And so it's really important to not only understand your other genes that influence your vitamin D pathways, but also getting blood testing to know your exact levels, right? Your weight status and your genes, those by themselves are not enough to tell me, do you or do you not have enough vitamin D? That exclusively comes through a test, right? So tests don't guess in that regard. But I would say, if you have poor genes there or you're carrying a bit of extra weight, that vitamin D test is really important because if you're sequestering your vitamin D in your tissues, you don't have good access to it. And this is where that second part of the conversation comes in, why vitamin D is really important to weight loss. It by itself, vitamin D by itself is not going to have you losing weight, right? It's not this magic pill that all of a sudden your body's like, whew, got to get rid of these pounds. Instead, what it is telling, it helps support so many other systems that support reduced inflammation, support good immunity, support amazing sex steroid hormones, many of which are needed for this weight loss journey, supports thyroid, supports cellular differentiation, right? You're doing the effort to lose weight, you're changing your diet, you're moving and you're exercising. You need new cells to come in and build and repair. Vitamin D is central to all of that. Your vitamin D status is central to that. So as you embark on whatever journey it is in terms of your weight, knowing your vitamin D status is important and ensuring that that vitamin D status is supporting you versus disabling you becomes very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think circadian rhythm is another component of that vitamin D is very important for. Um, Understanding the dosing protocols and things like that are really important with the genes because if it's a really slow delivery or just poor absorption into the actual receptor site and you dose up a little bit too late, that can effectively throw off your circadian rhythm. And there's no worse thing for weight loss than having poor circadian rhythm and poor sleep because that throws off human growth hormone, insulin sensitivity goes up. You're going to be even more sensitive to carbohydrates and things. When you're sleeping is when you're detoxing, when you're recovering. So doing the vitamin D right so that you're sort of front loading it as opposed to back loading it and doing it with some considerations from your genes. I mean, that really helps. So definitely do it that way. I would say another important consideration is magnesium intake. That's a really important thing because it kind of activates the vitamin D that's already in there as well. And if you're
Mm.
someone who is wired to have a lot of HPA axis dysregulation because you've got a lot of cortisol or your anxiety genes aren't well, the cortisol is going to have an impact here as well. And the more that you are stressed, the more you burn through magnesium, right? So you need to make sure that you're giving your body the right amount of magnesium because you'll burn through it. But magnesium, K2, vitamin A, like I talked about with BCMO1, all of these things are cofactors and activators of that vitamin D. So it's a bigger, I think, conversation than people just want to say. Just take this amount of IUs. Well, there's actually a lot of moving parts to the vitamin D conversation.
Yeah, and I think I think the nuance here is really important, right? I remember when I was going through school, there vitamin D was the rage, and ever there's arguably people were trying to get their levels up as high as they could. And then after that, we learned that, oh dear, that might be too high. And so people started to want to push the levels back down. And so I think vitamin D is it's important to have the nuance around this conversation. It is a hormone that impacts many different things, and too much can be just as detrimental and dangerous per se as too little.
Yeah, well, and especially if you have a 4 allele in the ApoE gene, you're going to want to be especially careful here as well. Like I have the 3-4, right? So it's a problematic genotype as far as calcification and potential plaque buildup in the arteries. So if you're that person, if you have that 4 allele in there, you want to be really careful about dosing vitamin D in the absence of the K2, especially with these higher doses, because it can absolutely calcify at high amounts, and vitamin K2 has that great anti calcifying effect in the body. So, co administering them is what I recommend. I never actually recommend D3 in the absence of K2, but especially if you've got a 4 allele in ApoE, you want to make sure that you're incorporating that. So, it's just a broad conversation about vitamin D. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Well, I think there's a broad conversation about a lot of this, right? Weight loss in general, even your introduction there, Justin, you listed off 35 million genes, all of which are really important and influential to weight loss, right? It's the summary you were offering the audience, which was a great summary, right? Really does speak to the importance of all these elements within the body needing to work synergistically together to give you the health outcomes that you want.
Absolutely. And I should elaborate on a couple of the genes that I didn't mention there. The only two that I didn't mention in the whole world, apparently, here would be the FTO and the MC4R that you briefly brought up. Because if you're aiming for weight loss, understand that those are two of the primary satiety genes that we look at, right? So FTO, they call it the fat and obesity gene. I don't love it, that particular title, because there's a lot to this.
Mhm.
But FTO is really important for something called the gut brain axis. I think Dr. K and I did a really good rundown, a whole webinar about gut brain axis and how that bidirectional circuit actually works.
Mhm.
But when you start to consume calories, right, when you start eating your meal, a signal is going to start to go from your gut to your brain to tell you, okay, we have had enough calories now. Like you're good. We don't need another portion.
Mhm.
And when we're delayed or we have kind of a suboptimal FTO gene, it basically makes it so that that signal takes longer to get to your brain. It's a slower signal. By the time it hits you and you've got that satiety signal, you've already gone back, right? You've had the second or the third serving that you didn't actually need from a caloric energy production standpoint. So FTO is a very important gene to understand there. And then MC4R, these are all in your diet panel, is the same idea, but it exists at the level of the palate, right? So when you start chewing that food down, the signal starts to kind of gear up. And some people are dysregulated there because genetically and ancestrally, some people were wired to kind of seek out different sources of stuff, different flavor profiles, salt and sweet and fat and these different things. So if you're dysregulated for MC4R, that's another mover on this satiety pathway as well that can influence things like ghrelin and leptin signaling. So piece of advice, if you do have suboptimal or dysregulated MC4R, try to include as many flavor profiles as possible in your diet, but then also make sure that you're chewing the heck out of your food, right? Like let the signal kind of get itself moving, because otherwise, if you're just chewing it quick and swallowing it, that signal is going to remain pretty slow and dormant. So you're going to want to make sure that you chew the heck out of that food. You should be doing that anyways, right? Because saliva changes the pH and does different things there. But those are all really important genes to consider with weight loss.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would offer, I know we're going to be transitioning into questions and answers soon, and I'm imagining this will come up a lot, right? Knowing your status of those genes, I think in particular for some of the satiety and snacking genes, can really shift how you're approaching weight loss in that your sense of hunger, your sense that the meal before you, even though it might be exceptionally healthy and really well rounded, isn't going to register at first as something that makes you feel full.
Knowing that,
Oh, hold on. Yeah, having mic issues. Knowing that, right, shifts how you can approach your weight loss. Knowing that going in, that even if you find that perfect meal, it's going to take a while to get that signal, shifts it from, I don't have willpower. I can't believe I'm still hungry. This diet sucks. I'm not eating enough on this diet, to, oh, the signal takes a while to get there. And I have strategies to figure that out, right? I think when we're talking through weight loss and approaches to metabolism, there's a history that medicine and society and the media have imparted that shame on you. It's because you don't have willpower. And the power of genes is actually this idea there's more to it than willpower. Of course, discipline's going to come in at some point. If I had the choice of a croissant or a piece of vegetable, my choice is always going to be croissant, right?
Right.
But there has to be an element of so there is always going to be discipline, but genes at least inform us how to exercise our discipline best, what to be expecting from the body, so that we're going about a diet as easy a way as possible, making things easy for us. Because it's a lot to undertake, let's be honest. Food is a beautiful thing. Putting any rules on it sucks.
Yeah. Dr. Laura and I last night actually we did a webinar all about GLP-1 agonists, and
Mm.
I encourage you guys to listen to that conversation as well because we did dive into some of the genes that are of relevance there as well. One of them is actually in your methylation panel. It's called FUT2, fucosyltransferase. And fucosyltransferase has a pretty big impact on the gut microbiome. And if you're what's called a secretor there or a non secretor, it can really influence how well your gut actually makes the GLP-1s in the first place, right? So that is a naturally occurring hormone that takes place. But if you're AA for FUT2, then that means you're a non secretor and it basically influences the short chain fatty acids in your microbiome. And that means that you don't make as much of this GLP-1 in the first place. So these also can be people that have a little bit more difficulty with that satiety signaling as well as that blood sugar regulation. I think blood sugar regulation is a really important thing for longevity in general, and we do a lot of work with that as well. You know, we see people, and I always recommend little strategies, right? Like postprandial exercise, for example, right? Like after you eat, postprandial just means after you eat. Then going
Mm-hmm.
for a little walk or moving your body, it helps to kind of partition that glucose a little bit better. Or
Yeah.
things like berberine and Ceylon cinnamon. Some of these blood glucose disposal agents can help a lot there as well. You ought to be resistance training. You ought to be doing some sort of caloric control because that does matter here. But understanding some of these other genes, as far as the microbiome, are very important. And by the way, if you guys haven't done any kind of gut mapping, I highly recommend it. And we actually do have a discount on right now. So it's a Christmas one. So it's Santa's Belly. And it actually gives you 20% off of the gut premium. So the gut 360 premium, one of our other flagship tests as well, for example, PGX. And then you guys also get a consult with one of us, be it myself, be it Dr. K, Dr. Laura, any of our great practitioners here. So you do get a 20% off of that bundle, and that is for the webinar audience tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, um, yeah, knowing your so close. So close, audience. Knowing your gut profile, as Justin's alluded to, can be really impactful in how you go about approaching weight loss, but also can explain how you're currently set up to favor your calories, right? Not all calories are created equal. And I mean that by once it hits your biome, the composition of your biome will actually, to an extent, dictate how much energy you're taking from that. So let's pretend I take in 100 calories and I have a biome that's a little more leaning towards formictites. My body is going to extract 100 of those calories. It's like, cool, we're going to take them all because we want this energy. if I take in 100 calories and my profile is leaning away from that, doesn't have as high a population there, we're not actually, the biome isn't extracting the same amount of calories from that. It's not an exact science. I'm not going to be able to say, oh, it's an 80 or 90, but it's fewer. And we know this. So your biome does influence how you are processing your foods as well as extracting other nutrients. And it will change. It is responsive to diet change to weight loss, which I think is really interesting. I think it's very interesting that we can track weight loss progress, especially is your body truly taking to the changes through biome testing. I just, I, I'm a little nerd and I love when data and AI and science collide in this happy little mess that is biome testing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and there's other species as well that are really important to look at. Like, for example, Akkermansia is a great one to know how much your body actually has in there because Akkermansia actually contributes to GLP-1 production, right? So again, like even some of these strains can have impact on the actual satiety signaling and things that we talk about. So getting an idea of pathogenic species and beneficial species that really helps you to understand the metabolism that much further because genes are one thing. What's going on in that gut is a whole nother because it's not even human,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not even you that's in there. It's a whole nother animal, so to speak. So those are two things that work great in tandem: understanding the genes and then understanding the flora and things that exist in your gut microbiome. The more info, the better, right? I mean, we're trying to map out really complex physiology, and the more just metrics and things that you have to work with, the better and more detailed your own personal healthcare plan can be. So that's what we're here to do, is to assist you with that. And the more information, the better, as long as it's high quality info, of course.
Mm-hmm. All right. So why don't we shift into some questions and answers? Because I see quite a few that have popped up. Our first one is coming in from Susan. And Susan, I hope you're still here because I'm going to ask an additional question of you. Susan is asking, can you address um, how, for those trying to gain weight and gain muscle, not lose weight, how new genes can influence them? So I would hope, Susan, as we've gone through some of our discussions, you can see how there's influence points there. But if you want to toss in to the chat without being crazy specific, I'd love to know, are you from I am at a good weight and I'm trying to add on muscle, or I'm at a lower than good weight and I'm really trying to get to a good weight? Because that will influence a little bit of the discussion there. While we're waiting for that answer from Susan, Justin, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. So the next question is from Sheila. Hello, Sheila. She's asking, what can we do about our AA presentation of the UCP1 gene? It looks like there's a few questions about UCP1 in here.
Hmm.
So, like I mentioned, I mean, when it's suboptimal, it means that your body just has that difficulty creating and producing the heat that you need for thermoregulation, as well as for activating that brown fat adipose. So, I'm a fan of certain things like sauna use, as I mentioned. I'm also a fan of utilizing ingredients like CLA that actually helps you with activating the brown fat adipose as well. To an extent, fasting is a useful strategy there, but you got to be a bit careful because when you fast, the body can get a little bit cold. A lot of people notice that towards the end of their fast, the body tends to, like, the temperature goes down a little bit. So we do want to make sure that you're in a fed state. And one thing that I do recommend is protein prioritization, because there's something called the thermic effect of feeding, and that's what happens when you take in protein. It actually takes a certain amount of energy to burn protein, right? So it creates more thermogenesis in the body as well. So protein heavy meals or protein forward meals, making sure that you have enough proteolytic enzymes and the things that you need to break that down. Then you can also use other thermogenic ingredients, like you can put a little bit of cayenne pepper into your coffee. There's different things that help sort of raise that thermogenesis up. And I'm a fan of all of those strategies, but honestly, the sauna is probably the number one. It really, you don't have to do any extra work to help heat the body up and get that kind of metabolism going.
Hmm. Excellent. All right. I'm going to go to Lisa's question, I believe, because I think, Justin, you just answered both Sheila and John's question, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to Lisa's question. So, Lisa's asking if I can circle back to my conversation about the liver and triglycerides and asking if what I meant by if the triglycerides have nowhere else to go, they may deposit in the liver. So, what I was saying there is when your liver is making those triglycerides, its initial instinct, its initial desire is not to keep them there because the point of that is to store energy. So, we ask the question of where do we store this energy? Where do we store these fatty acids? By and large, that is going to be within fat tissue. That can be adipose, meaning that proverbial belly or wherever else you store your fat externally, or that can be viscerally, meaning around the organs. Okay. So it will deposit. Sometimes it actually also deposits in muscles because this can be a really quick, semi quick energy source. Okay. But if your liver has tried to shunt it all out through VLDL, through the chylomicrons, through the mechanisms it has to export this energy, if it's gotten to a point where it's overwhelmed and it's like, yo, I only have this many buses to get this stuff out there. You filled up my buses and there is still triglycerides left. What now happens is the liver is like, cool, I guess I got to hold on to this until I have somewhere else to go. And so it then stores that within its own cells. It stores it within certain liver cells, hepatic cells. Okay. And unfortunately, if you continue to do that, if you're not cleaning that up, if you're not shunting, repairing, leveraging that energy, that tends to become fat deposits, which then block function within the liver. And ultimately, it takes a beat, but ultimately can get you to that stenotic picture where you're losing tissue, you're losing liver function there. Okay. And that's really what we're talking about, different stagings of liver disease, because it depends on, are you at that fat deposit stage? Are you shifting more into the stenotic stage? Okay. So I hope, Lisa, that was helpful. Justin, I think the next question is for you.
Yeah, and speaking of liver function, so the next question is about TUDCA. And Sheila is asking, when is the best time to take TUDCA? So I'm a big fan of TUDCA as an ingredient for that enterohepatic circulation that I mentioned. Um, TUDCA is actually also got some mitochondrial benefits as well. It's a pretty interesting ingredient. You're going to want to take it with food, and you're going to want to do it prior to fat heavy meals as well, because it's going to help you to digest those fatty acids by encouraging bile. You don't want to take a big dose at once, though. So if you're doing more than one dosage per day, you're going to want to split it up because you will get disaster pants if you are not careful with TUDCA, especially if you take it prior to a fatty acid heavy meal. So definitely do it just with meals. Just prior to meals is typically when I do it, especially if it's a fatty acid heavy meal. And then split the dose up. You don't want to take too much at a time. And I'm seeing some people asking, how do you spell it? That's TUDCA, TUDCA.
Cool. All right. Vanessa has our next question. So Vanessa's asking, what happens if you don't have a gallbladder? Oftentimes, many people do not have a gallbladder secondary to surgery. There's a few other reasons, but the point of a gallbladder is to be storing bile acid. And bile acid stores are then secreted when you're going through the digestive process. So when you consume your croissant or your vegetable, whatever the case might be, it goes into body and it inspires through a bunch of different physiologic chains. It inspires the gallbladder to excrete its contents, to excrete the bile. And what bile is it does several different things, but one of the more important things that it does is it helps digest fat. So when you don't have a gallbladder, you're missing that little pumping of bile that helps with fat digestion. Okay. And so the consequences of this are going to be a fewfold, right? Oftentimes, if you've had your gallbladder removed, there's going to be a lot of counseling around how much fat you can now be consuming. The thing that I don't often see, unfortunately, when that counseling happens is, well, let's think about all the fat soluble vitamins and fat soluble things that we need that we're now losing access to because we don't have that bile supporting the fat breakdown. So I really encourage, if you've had your gallbladder removed, make an appointment with a Justin of the world to understand, if I don't have this bile to break it down, what fat soluble vitamins am I in jeopardy of not having properly? Vitamin A is a really good example. There's several different others that you need to be mindful of because you don't want to get into a state of unintended malnutrition, right? Because you're not able to bring in some of that nutrition. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question there, Vanessa. Justin, do you want to grab the next question? I think it's from Marianne.
Yeah, so Marianne is asking, how does 3 ounces of alcohol compare with a small bag of chips or a potato not chilled for triglyceride production? She's saying her triglyceride is very high, about 350, and the
Mm.
MLX is CC. So just wondering what is causing the most damage. Um, I would have to say that it also depends on what's the form of alcohol, right? Because people often will have an alcoholic beverage that's mixed with something else. So is it just alcohol on its own, or is it like a mixed drink, or is it a wine, is it a beer, that kind of a thing? I would say that alcohol is likely a little bit worse in that respect. Um, Potato chips are in fact cooked and cooled, by the way, so they are actually a resistant starch if you think about it. So I didn't just give you all a pass to have to have nothing but potato chips, but it is a resistant starch because they cooked it and cooled it. If you can get a brand that isn't cooked in seed oils and different things, I mean, I don't consider it to be the worst food on the planet. But I think that alcohol would be worse from a triglyceride standpoint, even if it is 3 ounces. Um, Carbohydrates are still going to be pretty, implicit there as well. What do you think about that, Dr. K? Like alcohol is probably a bit worse on that one.
I'm really just struggling with the fact that you just justified every time I reach for potato chips now. I can't decide if I
Well,
love or hate you for that. Um, Jokes aside, and Justin, I am going to send you hate mail later on when I'm looking at a bag of chips and having a debate. Um, that jokes aside, I would say alcohol will be the worser choice there because you have to consider A, the sugar that is embedded within that alcohol, but separate to that, we know that alcohol by itself is very detrimental towards the liver. It does a lot of damage to the liver for a multitude of reasons that based on the fact that it has to be processed there, based on the fact that it shifts hormones and shifts immune, it does a lot of different things. So I would say, unfortunately, the alcohol choice there is kind of a double whammy. You're getting the sugar and you're getting the alcohol. Back in the day, 50, 60 years ago, we attributed fatty liver disease almost exclusively to alcoholism or alcohol substance use abuse words. Now that we have diet kind of catching up with that, I would say your question kind of gives that 1-2 punch of alcohol offers both. So I would say, if your levels are high there and you're looking for some diet support, don't hesitate to reach out to the Justins of the world, because I would offer there's probably many different levers that we can be pulling in order to support you. Yeah. Okay. Um, Christine had our next question, and it was in terms of when we were looking at DHCR7, what do the different alleles mean in terms of cholesterol? So if you have a G is in Georgia, you have a bit more of a preference towards shunting to cholesterol instead of vitamin D. If you have T is in Teresa, then you have more of a preference to shunt towards vitamin D. Okay, so if we're looking exclusively in terms of vitamin D, the optimal presentation here is going to be T Teresa, and the suboptimal presentation is going to be G Georgia. Okay, all right. Justin, the next question was designed for you. It's from David.
all right, so David is asking about the relationship between vitamin D and testosterone, and there absolutely is a relationship between those two things. Remember that vitamin D is, in fact, a hormone in the first place, right? So it's important for a lot of stuff. It is a fat soluble hormone. And interestingly, the vitamin D receptors are present in what's called the Leydig cells in the body, which are like these testosterone producing cells in the testes. And vitamin D really supports steroidogenesis by improving something called LH, luteinizing hormone. And that really stimulates testosterone production. Of course, it also reduces inflammation, insulin resistance, which can both suppress testosterone, right? So I'm not a big fan, by the way, of really spiking your insulin post workout. A lot of guys do that because insulin, being a storage hormone, it does have the benefit of shunting amino acids and carbohydrates into the muscles, but it also will have a bit of a blunting effect from that just natural pulse of testosterone and growth hormone that you got from hitting the weights, right? So a lot of people will use different forms of glucose, like really rapid absorbing glucose, to spike your insulin because it can help with muscle building in that regard. But you're blunting that natural hormonal effect that you got from hitting the weights in the first place. So personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that. But yeah, insulin sensitivity and luteinizing hormone, those are certainly impacted by vitamin D. So there's a direct relationship. Low vitamin D can mess with your testosterone. So make sure you keep that on the higher end.
Hmm. Perfect. All right. The next question we have is from Kimberly, and they're asking if the gene that we discussed, DHCR7, that deals with cholesterol and vitamin D, is this impacted by GI absorption? So you take your little pill of vitamin D3. The question is, um, oh, hold on. Oh, I apologize. I misread the question. Sorry, Kimberly. I was going to answer something you didn't ask. Kimberly's asking, would poor vitamin D absorption due to poor gut health contribute to weight management issues, even if you have an optimal DHCR7? So DHRC7 really impacts a lot of, when we're talking about the skin biogenesis of vitamin D, right? That decision point of cholesterol vitamin D happens more at that skin space. In terms of absorption, uh, I would offer you do need to get your vitamin D serum levels checked because there's an element of it's the serum levels at the end of the day that are going to matter. And if let's pretend that your digestive capacity or biome capacity is truly impeding your ability to absorb, you really only know that through serum levels. So I would say the gene that we discussed here doesn't really impact it at the gut level. And to answer your question, you need to know serum levels and then you can dose accordingly, which possibly, if you're not getting great absorption, might need to have slightly higher levels, right? But that's where it stands. All right, Justin, I think the next question might be for you. Or at least I hope it is because I haven't read it.
Yes. So the next question is from Marianne. She says that she has a suboptimal VDR. So remember that is the vitamin D receptor. And she's asking about what serum level of vitamin D would be advised with a BMI of about 30 and can't go into the sun due to melanoma history. Sorry to hear that. Um, Also, does not go into the sun increase your cholesterol as I'm not converting it, or is this a minimal impact? Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack within that. I would say the first thing to consider is that because vitamin D stores in adipose tissue, that the serum is, like Dr. K said, what you want to kind of look at there. There's a lot to consider with regard to a blanket recommendation for where your levels should be at. Normally, like, 50 nanograms per milliliter, between 40 and 60 is the ideal range. So just be aware of the type of test that you're doing as well. Like we recommend doing the 25 hydroxy vitamin D panel because that's a lot more accurate than some of the other ones are. As far as impact on cholesterol, I don't think it would have the biggest impact there. What do you think about that, Dr. K?
Meaning if you have a suboptimal presentation that shunts more towards cholesterol, is this going to be something that raises your cholesterol?
Yeah, the second half of the question was also, does not going into the sun increase her cholesterol as she's not converting any of the cholesterol into vitamin D? I would say that's going to have a minimal impact on actual cholesterol
Yeah,
level. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I'll be honest, I don't know um the true answer to that question because I think there's a few more parameters than is what captured within the gene. That said, if there is an impact, I would offer it is probably minimal, and more of the impact of your cholesterol is going to be coming from inflammation, access to it in your diet, and a few other non vitamin D synthesis related variables. Yeah, yeah. All right.
Okay. So John has the next question,
Hey,
and he's
John.
asking about MC4R.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Yeah. So John's asking around the optimal presentation. And Justin, please hold me honest here because my brain is alphabet soup. If you have a T allele, T as in Teresa, that's an optimal presentation. If you have a C, C as in Celine, then that's unfortunately that suboptimal presentation that is more inclining you towards snacking, towards not feeling satiated. Okay.
Correct.
Merci, monsieur. I feel like it's the end of the day, audience. There's going to be a moment where I'm like the K allele, the X allele. I'm just going to pull out numbers and letters that no one's aware of.
Yeah, and hope they're right.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe. I mean, I have a 1 in 26 chance, right?
Yep.
All right.
Okay, so the next question
Mhm.
is about antibiotics. So Vanessa is asking, is use of antibiotics related to weight gain if it wipes out good gut flora? Um, I would say absolutely. Yeah, I think that antibiotics, while sometimes necessary, can absolutely wipe out beneficial species that are associated with high quality metabolism. I've told the story before on these webinars about my own history of antibiotic use because I had acne growing up and my doctor put me on antibiotics and just kept me on it all the way till I was 18. So I was on them for 5 years straight. And metabolically, I'm telling you, that will wreak absolute havoc on your gut. And as Dr. K was saying before, we have this calories in, calories out equation that represents the bookends, but in between those bookends is all of the different processes and things in the body that partition the calories. And gut flora are part of how that goes. They can influence GLP-1, it can influence satiety signaling and nutrient partitioning. So, definitely, I would say you're going to want to go on a protocol and restore a positive gut flora there because antibiotic use can certainly have that effect, no doubt about it.
Mhm. Sweet. Love it. All right. I think our last question of the evening. Um, and Justin, this might be I think you and I each are going to have our own opinion, and I think it'd be great to offer the differing opinions. So, Masoma, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Um, Regarding sauna use, what is the appropriate time or temperature? They're saying that they have UCP1 GG, and that their hips typically feel cold to the touch. Um, and must be fully clothed to sleep well, right? So it sounds like they're kind of self reporting that they're a GG presentation, but additional their experience of that is that they often feel very chilly in their body and that they require external ways to keep warm.
Yeah, so I'll address the time and temperature and frequency and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously it depends on what you're aiming to do, but for me, I personally favor infrared over the wet saunas, just because they actually don't have to have as hot of an ambient temperature because the photons of light penetrate the skin and they actually heat the cell from the inside out. So it's great if you have suboptimal UCP1, or it's great if you're aiming for that added detox because you get a better release of heavy metals and things like that. I aim for at least 3 times a week personally in the sauna. Now that's I'm in Canada. It's cold. It's enjoyable. I think that if you live in a really hot climate, you may want to only do it a couple times a week because it's a hormetic stress, right? Remember that heat is stressful for the body, and we don't want to push you too far. So if 3 times a week isn't enough for you, you can also do up to 5. You don't want to do it every day because of the hormetic stress element there. I would say 2 to 5 is ideal. I personally do about 30 minutes per session. You just start to run the risk of dehydration if you go a little bit too far there. And remember, any hormetic stressor, we want to give you the appropriate dosage and not too much. In an infrared sauna, I mean, you're only going to get to like tops like 60 degrees Celsius. I mean, if you leave it on for an hour and a half, it'll get to like 65, but you don't have to go crazy hot
Mm.
because of the way that it heats your cells up. So yeah, 30 minutes in like 55, 60 degrees, that's all you're going to need. You're not going to need any more. And I'll let Dr. K take it from here on your opinion.
Yeah. Um, I would offer, and I appreciate this isn't going to be very much of a biohacky opinion, but I think it's one rooted in history. I wouldn't overthink it. And why do I say that? And I'm going to give a bit of an anecdote. So I've been using the sauna for many years, probably approaching 10 years now, because it makes my soul happy. And I remember in the first few years that I would go to the sauna, it was populated principally by these older Russian men. And I got into a conversation with one, and this is after I'd been going there for a few years, and I watched the demographics and the population of the sauna change. It went from older Russian men principally to a wide variety of people, young people, English people, like all walks of life. I live in Toronto, so we have wonderful many walks of life. And the guy was making comment to me. He's like, these young kids, they walk in and they're very scientific. They need to be in the sauna for this long. And if it's not this hot, they're not getting benefit. And he's like, they're overthinking it and they're taking away from the joy of the sauna. And his point, and I think it was well made, is that we've discovered sauna as this good thing because it's embedded within Russian culture, Scandinavian culture. There's many cultures, namely cold cultures, that have this experience. And it was through that observation that we recognized its benefit. So I don't want to take away from the science hacking of it. Justin, probably better than I, can be like, if you're in for this long and this long, it gives you this sort of detox. And there are very specific protocols out there, right? There's some protocols for women that want to do estrogen detox, and there's specific protocols for that. I don't want to discount it. But I think if it's something you're trying to bring in to your life in order to benefit you in the long term, find a routine and find a way that you really enjoy it and you can stick to it. Because I think sticking to it and enjoying it is going to be more powerful than some of the nitty gritty of the biohacking. Unless you truly get your joy from it has to be this hot for this long and I'm going to see this parameter change. If that's your joy, good Lord, chase it. That's wonderful. But also don't strip the joy out of it by chasing some of these numbers down too much. The goal is to get your heart beating. The goal is to get sweating. And once you've been doing that for a sustained period that isn't stressful on your body, check out your cardiovascular system first. Please talk to your doctor. Then you're deriving those benefits. Yeah, I think that's that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good rundown of sauna use. And of course, we know that saunas are, they're in all the blue zones. I mean, cultures that have it as like a regular social practice tend to have people who live a
Mm-hmm.
long time. And I think that it has to do with the detox as well as the heat shock proteins, that concentrated hyperthermia. That's very useful for a lot of different things. It's cytotoxic to cancer cells, etc. So I can't name a single device or strategy that does more for you from a
Yeah.
longevity perspective. It helps
Yeah.
with weight loss, mitochondrial biogenesis, great for BDNF, great for cardiovascular outcomes as well. So if y'all have never dabbled in sauna, I recommend it highly. It's one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes my soul happy. Up there with the croissant. All
Yes.
right, audience. It was so wonderful to be here with you this evening, and it was so wonderful to explore some of these new genes. Justin, sir, I learn from you every time we engage, and I'm very grateful that I get to do some of these webinars with you. So thank you, especially for sharing the grounded information. I like sitting up in my clouds. You sit with your feet firmly on the ground, and I value it.
That's
Yeah.
why we're such a good partnership. And yeah, thank you everybody for showing up. I hope you guys learned a
Mm-hmm.
little something today. I saw David in the comments saying he's blown away by our repository and ability to remember facts and little things about the genes. So thank you very much for the compliment. And keep on showing up. You'll keep on learning stuff. We're going to continue to unroll these genes, add them into what we're already doing. Sorry again for ripping through those first ones so quickly. But we've done a lot of great webinars about those, so I didn't want to spend too
Mm-hmm.
much time and get to the kind of fresh information tonight.